Hey folks, this week on ULS, Fedora is going cosmic, Manjaro is going immutable, and Canonical, they're taking something of a victory lap. It's all good, you don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 163, recorded Saturday, August 3rd. A terribly fun, bad idea. Hey folks, it is Saturday. It is time to get your geek on. We're going to talk about Linux and open source and hardware, all the stuff going on this week. It's going to be a lot of fun. It is, of course, not just me. We've got David and we have Jeff, the artists that, if I get it wrong, are otherwise known as Rob. That's a callback to last week, but they told me right before the show, by the way, my name's not Rob. Sure, Rob. That's exactly what Rob would say. Fun times. Welcome, guys.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Always love it.
Oh yeah, it's always fun. So we're going to let David kick us off with our news stories, and it's a new Xen. You're messing with my Xen thing, man.
Yes. I got Xen 4.19 to talk about. I've got a couple of links, and the reason I've got a couple of links is down at the bottom of our show notes. We always have a section called Down the Rabbit Hole. We don't have anything in it today, but oftentimes if we have extra stories and stuff, we throw them down there for anybody that doesn't get enough. Well, this particular story became my rabbit hole this week. Mm-hmm. So I actually added a second link called Understanding the Virtualization Spectrum from the Xen project, because the first reason I pulled up was actually kind of just funny. You know, it has the headline from Phoronix, Xen 4.19 released with new 9PFS backend, scales up to 16,383 CPUs. So, you know, I was going to be like, ooh, what motherboard has 16,383 sockets on it? And, you know, be kind of funny. It's not actually CPUs, it's cores. They're considered CPUs in Xen because that's how many it can emulate. But it can support up to 16,383 cores, which then can become a single CPU each. But in the process of reading through that and then following the link in the Phoronix article to the Xen project's announcement and reading through that, I use virtual machines all the time. Spin them up, tear them down. I've got some out in the cloud. I've got a virtualization host that I work with and stuff, but I've never actually dug into exactly what happens behind the scenes. And so I ended up going down this whole very interesting rabbit hole about Xen. So I would encourage you, if you're bored or just interested in it, to definitely research it. It's really interesting. I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on that, but I did add a link because it was my rabbit hole, so I wanted to share it with you guys. But this specific version 4.19, they addressed 13 security advisories. They include the adoption of additional MRSA C rules for improved code quality. And that's going to be mentioned in a minute as well. They've deprecated support for Xeon Pi, or Phi, I think it's Pi, it's PHI, with firm plan to remove it in the next release 4.20. So I was like, well, what is that? Because I'd never heard of that before either. Turns out that Intel, for a couple of years, attempted to do a GPU, general purpose GPU, to compete with AMD and NVIDIA in the large language model, early AI development kind of stuff, and didn't get a whole lot of traction, and so they actually dropped that. But that's what Xeon Phi is. Another interesting thing, well, at least something that was interesting to me, is they're continuing to work on their systemd support and streamlining it. So lib systemd is no longer a build dependency, which means that systemd notify support is retained, but now uses a standalone library implementation. So they're just continuing to enhance that and continue to refine that, which, and, you know, there's some other fixes and things, but they have some supporting quotes at the end of their press release. And two that I thought were interesting was Chris Chaplin, the open source software lead systems engineering at AMD. He talked about it, and they are excited about Xen 4.19 because with the MRSA C compliance nearing completion, they are saying that it brings them closer to a safety certifiable hypervisor. And we've actually mentioned safety certifiable stuff in like car operating systems and things in the past. So now they're talking about actually having the ability to safety certify virtual machines and virtual machine implementations. They're also looking forward to Xen's flexibility with device tree overlays for dynamic VM configurations. And Jonathan's talked about device tree overlays in the past, some of the stuff he's done. But it's going to help support AMD's FPGAs, which is the field programmable gate arrays, and adaptive SoCs or system on chips. So they're expecting it to help AMD position it as a robust solution for critical embedded applications. And then we also see Andrew Waffa, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Senior Director at the software communities at ARM, talking about, well, of course, they say, how ARM is a platform of choice for vast ecosystem developers. Got to tout ARM. But they're also excited about the significant improvements included in 4.19, including dynamic node programming for the ARM architecture. So there's just a lot of industry support, and I'm not specifically excluding NVIDIA or picking on them. They just didn't have a statement, or I would have mentioned them as well. So all that to say, it was a very interesting read for me, and it's always cool to see technology continue to move forward. And it was really interesting to see how virtualization has evolved. One quick tidbit, when Xen was developed that I learned while going down my rabbit hole, when Xen was developed back in version 1 at the university, it was done in partnership with Microsoft and Linux, and Microsoft Windows XP was actually written or modified to be able to run on Xen, but never released out of Microsoft research. So there are some benchmarks from that, but obviously for commercial reasons, it never left Microsoft research.
Yeah. So Xen ends up being like a hardware target, doesn't it? It's not exactly x86 or x86 64. It's its own things. You've got to have your kernel compiled specifically for it, right?
That was part of what that rabbit hole ended up being, is the different ways that they deal with the virtualization. So, because I've always, talked about QEMU and Xen, I never really understood it. Xen is just the kernel side. All of the device emulation stuff is done in QEMU.
Yeah. Which is neat because there's a lot of code share between the different projects.
Yeah, they're all under the same umbrella, but there is a distinction there. But there is a para-virtualization and full virtualization. And para-virtualization is where they are their own kernel, and the operating system has to be modified to support that, which is what Microsoft Research did to XP to be able to run on it. But then I'm trying to find it real quick. What they originally did, though, was I forget the term they used, but it was where they emulated all of the calls so that it was transparent to the operating system. And that was so inefficient that it wasn't sustainable. Yeah. But basically, they started there, and then they started working on getting it more efficient.
Yep. Interesting. I've never run anything that's actually Xen. I do have done a lot of virtualization, but nothing with Xen. And I find it an intriguing thing. I'm now kind of in the background looking. It's like, can I do this with Alma Linux? Can I use Alma Linux as the Xen hypervisor and as a Xen guest? And will I get noticeably better performance from that? Questions abound. All right, Jeff, do we want to talk about Canonical?
We do, and I'd like to have a little bit of good news. So, in the wake of Intel's bad news about layoffs, I thought it'd be good to have something a little more positive. So Canonical has announced their financial statements in the UK, and I thought it'd be a report on how they've done. Canonical reported revenue for 2023 at $251 million US, which is up from the previous year, which had a profit of $205 million. Now, their gross margin did take a small drop, though, from the previous year's 82%. So 82% to 2023's 80%. So they lost 2% in gross margin. Gross margin, for those that don't know, is the total amount of sales versus the cost of generating the products or service. The 80% value means that for every dollar that Canonical took in, they were able to keep 80% of it as profit, and the other 20% went to running the business, overhead, paying people, that kind of thing. Another good sign of the times is their headcount went in 2022 was 858 people, and now for 2023's financial statement, they have 1,034 people on the books. So they've had a nice increase in size, and we've covered some of that where they've been hiring here and there and growing their business. And it's good to see that they're making more money at it. For those newer to the Linux community, I do want to point out that even just a few years ago, Canonical was running at a loss. It's now it's actually making money and able to stand on its own. But by recent, I mean 2019, they were still operating at a loss. Goodness. And at that time, they only had 473 people, which is still quite a bit. But, Mark Shuttleworth doesn't want to bankroll Canonical forever. He wants them to become a viable business, which they are. Looking at the last few years, Canonical's come quite far and growing up in size. The article in the show notes credits some of the recent uplift from the Ubuntu Pro paid customers and other subscription services. Canonical's financial statements does make mention of a significant product launch, which is scheduled for 2024, but at this time, we don't have a lot of specifics. So they hinted in the financial release, but they don't give us details. There's even talk of possibly carrying out an IPO, but none of that's cemented in yet. We'll have to wait and see if that happens. IPO, for those that don't know, is initial public offering. That's where they would actually sell stock. So you could buy stock in Canonical and they become a public company. And it helps generate revenue and money for the company so they can maybe take a bigger step into some other area or hire more people, or whenever a cash flow injection would really help them achieve their next goal. Take a look at the article in the show notes if you want more details, so you can see the changes in things like the sales and marketing expenses and the research and development expenses, among other things. It's all in there. It's very detailed. So if you've looked through financial reports, you know that every item is in there, is all lined out, so you can really see how the company's doing. The full financial statement is linked in all its glorious splendor, and I'm just happy there's some good news in the tech sector somewhere.
Indeed. I didn't think things are not quite that dire, but yes, I get what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, later on we're going to have a little more gloom and doom.
Well, something to look forward to.
Jonathan story.
Something to look forward to. Yeah, there is some crazy stuff going on. No, good for Canonical. We every once in a while like to have a little bit of fun at Canonical's expense, but they, for the most part, are a good member of the community. They do good work, and so I'm glad to see that they are doing well. Good for them.
Yeah.
AE4KO, Aaron says it wouldn't surprise him if Canonical is benefiting from Red Hat's marketing strategy changes, air quotes. Like, yeah, that could be.
Yeah, very, very possible. And they did talk about Canonical's cloud business too. It's picking up some revenue for them, as more and more stuff gets into the cloud, and plus the pro subscriptions, all that, so you can run your machines a lot longer, so on. And we mentioned before, but it is free for, I think it's 5 machines or less, something like that. So if you want to run a machine longer and you want the pro benefits, you can do it as a home user and not pay anything.
Why would you, as a home user, want to run really old Linux software, though? I don't. Well, I like being on the bleeding edge.
I do too, but there's always somebody that just, it works. I don't want to touch it.
Yep.
It makes them happy, or it's grandma's computer. I don't want anything to change. I don't want any buttons to move. I don't want,
That is true. All right. Well, that is Canonical. Let's talk for a bit about Manjaro and something new that Manjaro is dipping their toes into, we shall say. Manjaro now has a very early preview, a test of an immutable spin of Manjaro. So this is based on Arch, which this is kind of an incongruous thing. Like, it just doesn't fit together. Arch-based and immutable. Well, they're going to make it work. And the image is available. They are asking people to test it. It is actually based on ArcDep, which is from the Arcane Linux distro. But Manjaro is offering this for people to test. And in the forums, there is an actual representative, the Manjaro team, is asked, is this going to become official? And he says, our plan is definitely for it to become an official variant of Manjaro. With the community testing version, we are now gathering some feedback on what people expect from such a variant and what should still go in there or what could be slimmed down. So the official word is that Manjaro is going to be officially, how many times can I say official in this story? Manjaro is officially going to be shipping an immutable Linux distro. So if you want your Manjaro, but you don't want it to ever break, and if it does break, you want to be able to roll it back, Manjaro immutable.
Interesting.
I don't know. Isn't it kind of at odds with what Manjaro is, though, where it's so much more cutting edge and?
So that's kind of what I was getting at. I used the $5 word incongruous. It seems that way, doesn't it? And especially because it's based on Arch, where like you compile everything yourself. I don't know. So maybe they have some system where you compile everything and then you switch to it in an immutable way, which could be interesting. I don't know all of the details about how they've made this work. It's a cool idea, though. Like, so
I guess immutable. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Arch and Manjaro, they're on the bleeding edge, and so breakages happen. So from another point of view, that is the distro where you would want the features of immutable to be able to roll back to a working image.
And I was going to say, immutable doesn't necessarily have any indication of how often it updates. I mean, you could update every 30 minutes and still be immutable because you're able to roll back.
Technically. And one more thing on this is none of the immutable distros are actually like technically immutable. They just what they mean by that is they're versioned and they have rollback to like known good software.
I remember that was discussed before, and isn't atomic more accurate than immutable?
It probably is. The problem with that term is at least Fedora uses atomic as sort of their name for their atomic distro. So maybe we need yet another term that lets that really captures this without being a brand name. The Kleenex, right? Kleenex is where the brand name is taken over the thing. Nobody talks about facial tissues anymore. So maybe Atomic Linux is just going to stick. I don't know.
Well, if they're doing this, I'm waiting for Red Hat Enterprise Linux Rawhide. Update your server daily.
I mean,
test them in production. Let's go.
Kind of what Fedora is.
No. Official Red Hat.
I mean, that's kind of what Fedora is. It's kind of you can run it as a server, and it's sort of from Red Hat, but it's kind of always rolling and bleeding, and yeah.
But it's not advertised as server. See?
No, Fedora has a server spin. There is a Fedora server image. You can download it.
Rawhide though.
Okay, so that's interesting. I don't know if there is a Rawhide server image.
No, I don't think there is.
Now you can install Rawhide and then install like the server package set. So sure, we can almost get there.
Well, I was just going with immutable Manjaro going, oh, let's have daily updated enterprise Linux.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about one of the technologies that tends to play into immutable Linux distros. And that's Snap and Flatpak. And David, you're going to tell us all about both of them.
Oh, no, actually, I'm not.
And which one's better?
Nope, not going to do that either. So we have talked about Snap and Flatpak extensively, and there have even been competitions and benchmarks to decree why one is better than the other. But there is an article from ZDNet, so more of a general tech organization, not open source specific, that talks about Snap and Flatpak and why they make Linux a better OS. So I am not going to, they actually, in this article, they do talk a little bit about the differences between Snap and Flatpak, and I'm not going to go down that path because if you're interested in that, we've talked about it at length in the past, and I guarantee you next time there's an update, we'll be talking about it at length in the future. But what I really like about this article and why I wanted to bring it before you guys today is they talk about it from a end user perspective and why and what is helpful about Snap and Flatpak. So they start out by talking about how for a long time Linux received a bad rap, not just for being difficult to use, but for not having the software necessary to be productive. And yes, maybe that was a valid argument. They say since using the operating system in the early days of 1997. Yes, last century. But they go on to talk about, okay, let's just take something, for example, like Firefox. Firefox is pretty much included. So you can sudo apt install Firefox on a Debian or Ubuntu or Debian-based distro, or if you've got your RHEL-based distro, a DNF install Firefox, or, so it's pretty simple to do. But if you take something more complicated and not built in, like say Zoom, for example, you're going to have to go find the repos or repositories that contain the Zoom code. And then when you add those and attempt to install it, you're going to find that it's got dependencies. And a lot of times you'll run into situations where you'll already have software installed on your machine that has one version of a dependency, and then other software requires a different version of the same dependency. And if you do that, you break the first software and you enter into what is often known as dependency hell. Where you're just in the cycle of breaking things and trying to get updates to everything all at the same time to get everything functional. Flatpak and Snap both solve that problem because they build all of the dependencies to run any particular application into the software repository. So there is no external dependency other than the Snap or Flatpak system itself. So again, in their example using Zoom, you just snap install Zoom-client, and now you have that Zoom client available to you. Both of them you have the Snapcraft store or FlatHub where you can go and find software that you might not otherwise have access to or have known about. So they both make installing software easier on Linux, especially for someone that doesn't want to have to understand or worry about dependencies, how software relates. What even does dependency mean? Why does this depend on that? I don't care. I just want to run whatever my software is. So they are reducing the barrier to entry. Now, there can be arguments that, hey, now you have these really bloated applications because you have a whole bunch of software that shares dependencies, and each installation now has a copy of the exact same dependencies. And those are some of the arguments against Snap and Flatpak. But if we're pragmatic, it doesn't really matter because our systems have more memory. They have more storage space. The system I'm talking to you from right now has two M.2 2 terabyte SSDs in it. So realistically, the end user experience being better is more important than saving a couple of megabytes or even a gig here or there. So to summarize, this writer says, which I want to actually give credit, I didn't get his name at the beginning, or his or her name at the beginning, Jack Wallen. It says that because of Snap and Flatpak, he actually feels more comfortable recommending Linux to beginners and to people who are interested in just trying different things. So it's just to say that as much as we can nitpick the details and debate the pros and cons of the technical details, the fact that we have things like Flatpak and Snap is decreasing the barrier to entry to the open source community. And that's a net positive.
Yeah. So I've got a link that I added here. It's off to a Hackaday article about Lightburn, which is software for laser cutters that has recently dropped their Linux version. And they talk about the segmentation of Linux distributions complicating things. And yes, that is a problem. Anyone that's tried to do software development, particularly where you have, somebody wants to be able to install on Debian and Ubuntu. Like I've got a project right now where when people come and say, I want to do this on Ubuntu. Well, you might be able to compile it, but you may have problems. And we support Debian officially. It's the way it is. Well, the solution for some of this is, I think, snaps and flatpaks. And I will not go so far as to say that even the majority of applications should be containerized. I think the majority of applications should be built the way that they're built now. But there is this subset of apps that it makes a lot of sense to containerize. And the browser may or may not be one of them. I don't know. I still like having the browser installed for real. But there are some other things where it does make a lot of sense. Particularly some of these projects that are not, or programs even, that are not open source projects where all of the users are running Linux, but it's something that's going to be mainly on Windows, and they would like to support one version of Linux. They want to just target Ubuntu and be done with it. And then, other people, what about Fedora? I'm on Mint. And you put it in a Flatpak or a Snap and you're done. And I think it makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah. And even like that, where you're porting a Windows application, let's say that you want to use Wine or Proton or something to get your Windows application running, and you bundle that into a Flatpak or a Snap, and then you don't have to worry about keeping up with the updates of that project. Mm-hmm. I mean, on the flip side, you may need to worry about security, but
Jeff?
Well, I was going to say a couple of things. One is that the article says the snaps are only available at the Canonical store. That's not quite true, because a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago now, we talked about Canonical hired somebody, and they're working with other distributions to be able to set up their own Snap stores. Mm-hmm. So I would say the majority right now, almost all is on the Canonical Snap store, but they're opening that up so more people can set up their own store and be able to use it. Yeah. And the other thing I was going to mention is even Linus Torvalds has mentioned how, one of the reasons he is so adamant about not breaking user space is because the rest of Linux, he talked about having a dive program, and he says just they don't offer it for Linux because Linux's flexibility is also its Achilles heel, kind of like Jonathan said, where, we officially support this, but you want to put it on another distribution. Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't work,
Yeah. I can't tell you the number of games that got Linux releases, even just a few years ago, that don't work on Linux native anymore. But what continues to work are the Windows releases running in Wine or Proton. It's the craziest thing. But we are at the point now where, because Windows is a relatively stable, in fact, Windows is that they have a stable user space. and things that ran on Windows 95 are pretty much expected to still run on modern Windows. So it has become to the point to where if you want something to continue running on a computer for a long time, you build it for Windows and then you use Wine to run it on Linux, which is just a crazy place to come to, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, we have the stable API then. And you talked about security too. I don't know what it is in Flatpak, but in Snap, there is some sandboxing. I don't know as it's, highly secure, but there's at least some.
That's the other weird thing with Snap is that to really get that sandboxing to work correctly, it requires, as of last time I checked, now I'm hopeful that they will eventually fix this, maybe they already have, but as of the last time I checked, to really properly sandbox your snaps, you needed an out-of-tree kernel patch. That unfortunately Canonical kind of signaled that they were done trying to get it upstreamed and they just gave up on that. So that's one of the big problems with Snap, trying to go to other distros other than Ubuntu.
Oh, so that's good to know. I didn't know that.
Yep. All right. Let's talk about the opposite. Some uplifting news. At least I think it's uplifting. I like it. I like the idea of it. I don't think they're going to pry my cold hard fingers off of my KDE, at least not on my desktop. But on the laptop, this might be interesting.
Maybe not yet.
What is Fedora up to?
Well, Fedora very likely might be getting a new desktop environment by the way of System 76. Fedora might be going Cosmic, at least as an option. Now, just to refresh people's memory, Cosmic is a desktop environment that System 76 is working on, that they've written this from scratch, which hasn't been done in a long time. The last real big desktop environments, KDE and GNOME, have been around for a very long time. And they're the two juggernauts in the desktop environments. Yes, there's a lot of other ones out there, but the biggest market share is KDE and GNOME. That's the huge chunk of what's out there. Cosmic is not based on any previous desktop environment. It's all new, custom-built compositor library and applets, and it's going to be a tiling window manager. So it will help you arrange your windows, which may or may not be a feature you're really looking forward to. That one's a little subjective. It's designed to be highly customizable, and it's built using Rust, so they're trying to use a modern memory-safe programming language. Not that it's going to fix everything, like security-wise, but, another little thing to help keep things safe. Every little bit helps. Currently, Cosmic is almost to alpha stage, and it runs on Pop! OS, which is System 76's own distribution, and it's based on Ubuntu. So System 76, for those that don't know, is a hardware builder, and they make laptops, desktops, servers, all of which are Linux-friendly and come pre-installed with Linux. So that out of the way, now that everybody's all caught up, let's go back to Fedora. So this information comes from a discussion over at X, or the site formerly known as Twitter. A user had a question, and Carl Ritchell, the CEO and founder of System 76, had this to say. When asked about installing Cosmic on Pop! OS version 22, Carl said, yep, that's where the most development was done, but we've moved it to Pop! 24 for the alpha release and beyond. Then someone asked, will there be an official spin of it in the future or something like that? Carl then replied, yes, we may miss the Fedora 41 window, so hopefully Fedora 42. Okay, that sounds pretty cool, right? But keep in mind, this is not an official announcement. Nobody Fedora was in on this discussion, and nothing came across on official letterhead, so take this with a grain of salt, but at least initially, it looks promising that we'll have a second, probably more in the future for distributions, we'll have Cosmic as an option. So Fedora gets it going, then how long before a bunch of the other ones jump on? Probably not too long. The article in the show notes speculates that rolling release distributions such as Arch and OpenSUSE, Tumbleweed will probably have it available in the repositories as soon as the official alpha is out, which is set to release to the general public on August 8th. So now, just so everybody's aware, I always say this, but it's an alpha, so there's going to be bugs, it's going to be rough, but it at least should sort of work, give you a good sense of the feel of it anyway. just seems there's a lot of good news in Linux this past week. And so take a look at the article in the show notes for all the details and for other links to the discussion on X and links to pre-release versions of Cosmic. So if you're really adventurous, you can try it out before it hits alpha.
Yeah, so I happened to be in on a media call. Was it yesterday or the day before? With Carl Ritchell and some of the other Pop! OS System 76 developers, and it's a fairly certain thing that Cosmic is coming to Fedora. In fact, I've got a link here that there's already a Cosmic SIG matrix chat, which I believe that means that there is also a Cosmic SIG being special interest group. So it's coming to Fedora. It's not been confirmed that there's going to be a spin for it, but Cosmic is pretty certainly coming to Fedora. And then there's some other neat things about Cosmic coming up. One of them being, I asked on that very call, what about HDR? That was one thing that was promised. I haven't heard anything about it. And the answer was, it's not ready for Alpha 1 yet, but we're thinking it's going to make Alpha 2. So they are really making some quick progress with Cosmic on Pop! OS. It's really impressive.
So just to clarify my understanding, Cosmic is basically on the same plane as KDE or GNOME. So it's running on top of Wayland?
Yes and no. So Wayland things don't run on top of Wayland. Things, they implement Wayland. And so Wayland is not like X. X11 was a server that ran, and then your desktop environment ran on top of that. That's not actually how Wayland works. With Wayland, it's basically just a specification, and your desktop environment gets to implement the specification.
So does Cosmic implement Wayland then?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, maybe the more interesting question: will Cosmic run on top of X11? And I don't think so. I think it is Wayland only. And then Cosmic also is written in Rust, and it is literally a new ground-up desktop environment built on top of WL Roots, I think. So in this case, WL Roots is like the server component that provides some of that very low-level stuff. So I guess it's not entirely accurate to say that Cosmic implements all of this, because they're reusing WL Roots. That's sort of the reference implementation, I believe is the way that they put it. But it's a lot of new code, and it's a lot of cool stuff that they've got in there. I got to see a little demo of it. It was neat.
And kind of probably a good analogy to think about this for the non-computer programmers. When Jonathan says it implements a spec, it's, for example, Wayland has, now that I'm just making this up, but has a command, draw a red box. Mm-hmm. So it says, okay, when you do this, you're going to have a box, and here's how it needs to look. Mm-hmm. They don't care how you do it. That's all under the hood for your desktop manager. You just know you have to make it happen. So how you internally handle that command, as long as you get the same output, that's okay.
Yeah, essentially. And so the reason that's important is because now you have programs that just, an application now, not even a desktop environment, but just an application, it will target the Wayland APIs. And so long as your desktop environments all implement those APIs correctly, and then your program is written properly to use them, you can take that exact same source code and it'll run on Cosmic, on KDE Wayland, on GNOME Wayland. You know, it's not a problem. It's just it's pluggable into that established API.
So are they using WL Roots, or
Yes.
are they like using it as a reference? Because I just pulled up WL Roots and noticed it appears to be written in C, not Rust.
I believe that they are actually using WL Roots as one of the layers underneath.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, it would not be entirely accurate to say that everything about Cosmic is done in Rust, but everything built on top of WL Roots. So all of the new code that the Pop! OS developers have written is in Rust.
Yeah.
So I tell
Until
you,
okay.
So I'll tell you what. I'm actually interviewing Carl Ritchell on Floss Weekly at the end of this month, and I will make sure and ask him about that. Do they intend to rewrite WL Roots in Rust? And I imagine he will laugh at me, but that's okay.
Or wait for the DARPA tractor program to automate C and C++ conversion to Rust, trying to use AI.
That's a real thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
DARPA wants to convert a lot of older C and C++ code to Rust code. But they acknowledge that, that's sometimes AI makes good code and sometimes it doesn't make good code.
I didn't know sometimes it made good code.
Yeah, no, what actually happens is sometimes AI regurgitates good code.
Yeah, I would give you that.
Although, to be fair, that's what programmers do a lot of times too.
Yes. Okay.
We know, David. How much of our code has / link to Stack Overflow? Let's be honest.
Oh, well, that right there determines what level of programmer you are, because the higher level, you remove that comment.
That's actually so. If you go and look, that is actually a license violation. Stack Overflow in their terms of service. This is an interesting tidbit for folks. In the terms of service of Stack Overflow, it has essentially a built-in CLA that says, any code that you write as a part of a Stack Overflow answer automatically gets licensed with, and I forget the exact license that they use. It's one of the permissive licenses. So it's MIT or Apache or BSD. It's one of those, with the addendum that all that is required to properly attribute is a link to where on Stack Overflow you found it. So you can literally copy and paste Stack Overflow code in the comments, put a link to the page where you found it, and you are good to go on the licensing. It's great.
Well, I guess to elaborate on my answer then, a higher level programmer, even if they find the answer there, they won't take it verbatim. They'll rewrite it into their code. And part of that, so we're being a little facetious and a little whatever, but in all seriousness, I don't ever like to copy and paste code in anything I do, because I want to thoroughly understand what it's doing. And if it's to the point that I have to research it, then it's not simple. It's something more complicated. And so I want to thoroughly understand what it's doing, so I'm going to rewrite it anyway.
Yeah, that's fair. Even when I rewrite it, though, I like to leave a link, a breadcrumb. Here's where you find the code that you looked at to understand how this works.
Show title: David takes the high road.
I don't know about that.
All right. So we covered Cosmic. I bragged about being on the press call. Let's talk about Fossa and StackShare.
Oh, my turn again. All right.
David's turn again.
Okay.
I cut him up there.
That's no problem. I derailed that whole conversation. I didn't even know where we were at anymore. So I've got an article about Fossa and StackShare, and part of the reason, I like to keep an eye on open source news and things, and this is from TechCrunch by Dominic Midori Davis, and I was actually not aware of either of these organizations until I read this article. So it is an article about Fossa buying StackShare, but looking into it, first off, I'm actually kind of surprised I was not aware of StackShare. It was started by Jonas Beshwared, who was a solo founder, and he started StackShare because as he was looking into full stack solutions, which is what you call what you call the software that includes your operating system, your programming languages, your database engine, what JavaScript code you're running in the web browser when you're building a web, not just a website, but a web portal, a web application. That whole software is known as a software stack. And he said that he started having the issue of knowing, what stack to use as he was getting into that. And then, what broader set of developer tools to use. And he realized that there were a lot of questions around that for developers as a getting into that. So he created StackShare so that it could be a community where people talk about the stack they use, the pros and cons of it, and all of that. Fossa is a company that provides an important service. They have a free tier, and then they have paid tiers, but they're all about SBOMs. And I'm sure we've talked about SBOMs before, but that is a software bill of material. It's especially important not especially, but it is important in open source projects because you need to be able to, when you're dealing with security issues and things that can crop up in different packages out there that may be included, not even necessarily, you may not have included them directly, but when you imported a package in whatever programming language you use, Java or Python or any other programming language, NPM, for JavaScript. But anyway, when you've imported a package that winds up having other dependencies. I was just talking about dependencies a little bit ago. So it's connected to a bunch of other things. So you've actually imported all this third-party code that you haven't written yourself, and you probably haven't either had the time or been able to audit yourself. So when there are security issues that come up, you need to be able to say, hey, is this thing that I wrote that is running out there as a service, does it have that vulnerability? So that's what Fossa does, is it manages your projects and keeps up with every time you do an update, every time you pull in new code, what that software is and what all the dependencies are, so that you can keep up with security and keep up with your software bill of materials. We're also seeing, especially in the U.S., although other nations are doing it as well, people that are doing software development as contracts for governments, whether local or federal. That's becoming more and more of a requirement. There's probably still exceptions to that requirement, but because they need to know when they purchase the software, what all does it include, so that they can be monitoring it for security vulnerabilities. That's the big issue around the SBOM. But so first off, I wasn't aware of either company, and I have use for both, so that was pretty cool. But beyond that, if you're watching the video, it's quite obvious. But I'm an older white guy, and as I've actually mentioned before, because, I have daughters interested in it, but I also have a lot of friends of color that are interested in IT and stuff. It's always been a passion of mine to celebrate and do everything I can to diversify technology. So both Giannis himself and then a lot of his investors, which are celebrated in here, are people of color. And so that is something that is less common in technology and in open source. And so that is pretty cool. So I wanted to point that out specifically as well, because that is mentioned in there. He talks about some of the investors that he worked with. He said, he's quoted as saying, "I also believe there aren't enough Black people investing in the developer tools and enterprise space. I'm really proud to have had some amazing ones back me and StackShare." So just seeing a success story like that is awesome. And so I just wanted to celebrate that as well.
Yeah, this is a cool story. I'm particularly interested in StackShare. There's multiple times that you go Facebook or Google. I wonder how they solved this problem. And a lot of these big companies, they have StackShare stacks set up to where you can go and just look and, they did this in Python, or, Facebook, they're using PHP for stuff. And so that's pretty neat. And I think it's going to be a lot of work for them, but I think it might be a really neat integration with Fossa to be able to have not just, this idea of a technology stack, but then build onto that kind of a I don't know what you would call it, but like a full stack SBOM maybe, so that you know every library and every bit of software that's running everywhere in your business. Like that's pretty interesting and pretty intriguing. I can definitely see why people were intrigued with that. So very cool, something to keep an eye on. And best of luck to them. Hope they do well.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right, Jeff. Yes, Jeff is going to tell us all about all of the hardware, and then I'm going to tell you more about the hardware. So strap in. We're about to talk hardware,
but not the hardware I'm talking about. So this next segment I've got here is a benchmarking comparison story of the AMD Zen 5 300 series of processors. Now, for those that don't know, these are for laptops and other mobile devices. The 9000 series, which is not due until the 15th of August, those are the desktop versions, but they're also the Zen 5 cores. As of right now, there are 3 models of this processor that's released. They're all AMD Ryzen AI 9s, but the low end has just 365 appended to that mouthful. The middle one is an HX 370, and the top of the line, which was just announced, is an HX 375. The 365 is 10 cores and 20 threads with a 5 gigahertz boost frequency. The 370 has 12 cores and 24 threads with a 5.1 gigahertz boost frequency. And the 375 is the same as the 370, except for the NPU, which is the bit of the chip used for AI. It's a little faster at 55 tops versus 50 tops. Now, our friend Michael Larrable over at Phoronix has been benchmarking his little heart out, so I've got 3 stories in the show notes, and all 3 stories are talking about the 365 and 370 CPUs. He did not have a 375, and the software to fully take advantage of the NPU is still working its way into the kernel, so there wouldn't be any valuable benchmarking yet anyway. So for what Michael's running, the 375 and the 370 are basically going to look identical. So the first article is benchmarking the 365, and I've included this because a previous story, which is linked inside that first article, covers the 370. This one lets you see the 2 chips side by side among a lot of other AMD and Intel mobile CPUs. So part of the articles now do go into the laptops they're in and give details. So if you're so interested in looking for a new laptop, you definitely pay attention to which story you follow, because, like, for example, the 370, which I don't have linked, but it is in the 365 story, does go into the laptop and the hardware that it's housed around. Now, I'm going to summarize here because he ran over 130 benchmarks, so anybody wanting to see the full details, look at the first link in the show notes for your particular situation. Bottom line is the 370 was the fastest, with the 365 coming in second, but only by a small margin. Wasn't a lot of difference between them, but I mean, the 370 was faster. The biggest noteworthy information called out in the article was that the 365 is basically the same speed as the Ryzen 7 7800HS, but it's only using 52% of the power. Now, this was called out in the article and the previous 370 article, the large increase in power efficiency. So for those asking, no, there was not an Apple laptop, so we don't see how it compares to an M3. There are a lot of discussions in the comments which talk about how AMD closed the gap, but there's a lot of disagreement on the best way to actually measure the efficiency. And things like single-threaded benchmarks, are they that valuable of a benchmark versus real-world use? We'll probably see something in the future when they get directly benchmarked, but until then, we have some educated guesses, but there's a lot of disagreement. So, for example, taking a benchmark like a Blender render and then looking at the watts, while other people say joules, and they're not the same measurement. So, I'll leave that research to the listener on that. But the second link in the show notes is another for a Phoronix article where Michael benchmarks Windows 11 versus Ubuntu Linux performance on the 365 processor. So Michael used Windows 11 with all available system and firmware updates as of launch day launch day of the 365, and he used Ubuntu 24.04 LTS and upgraded the kernel to 6.10 stable and updated the Mesa Git by the OBF PPA, and again had the latest AMD GPU firmware files. It was the same laptop, he just ran dual boot, so it's identical hardware. This time, Michael had a shorter version of the benchmarking with a little over 100 benchmarks ran instead of the previous story's 130. And looking over the results, it was pretty close, with the 6.10 kernel and Ubuntu 24.04 being a little bit less than 3% faster than Windows 11. So real world performance, basically it's the same. You're not going to tell a 3% performance sitting at the keyboard. But I think it's pretty good, though, for launch day that we see Linux for launch day, because, we know how Linux ages like fine wine and gets a lot better with age. So on opening day, I'll take a 3% faster than Windows. We know for a fact it's only going to get better as time goes on. Now, the third article in the show notes I have linked, Michael benchmarks SMT performance on the 365 processor. Why would Michael benchmark hyperthreading? Because the new Intel mobile processors, which are due out September 3rd, they get rid of hyperthreading. Intel says they see a benefit. AMD says hyperthreading still works really well for them, and they're going to keep it in. Now, looking at Michael's results, I would have to agree. Leaving hyperthreading on had a definite performance improvement over removing it, and the power consumption was identical. Well, within error of noise. So realistically, same amount of power. And even temperature at the CPU is basically the same, which would follow because if it's taking the same power, it's going to have the same heat. So turning on the AMD 300 series of chips, there's no downside to leaving hyperthreading on, only benefits. Now, we will have to take a look and see what Intel does. And once they release their new chips, we'll have a whole bunch more benchmarking, and I'll report on what the findings are. So stay tuned to future Untitled Linux shows for all the new hardware goodness coming your way this year. But should be rather exciting.
I've got to say, AMD, we love you, but your numbering system is terrible. It has been for a while, yeah. But the AMD 365. I love a comment. I don't know who it was, but a comment somebody made. Is that related to Office 365 or the number of days in a year when it's a leap year? I don't know.
Oh,
what? Oh.
And I don't know what it is about tech company, because there's no tech company out there that has not done this. They have all, at one time or another, had garbage names.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't even bring up the USB consortium. That. Why it makes perfect sense. Well, when it's your day job and that's all you look at all day, it makes perfect sense. Average person, non-techie, goes, what the heck is this?
I also think that there's maybe some non-techie marketing people involved at some point. It was like, oh, we need a new number for whatever, SEO or something.
It's fairly obvious that they were trying to tap into the AI goodness with this one. It's like, let's name it AI. Well, if we name it AI, though, it's not going to be, it doesn't fit. It's not a Ryzen, whatever anymore. Just call it AI. It'll be fine. It'll be great.
Yeah, I don't know. It's quite the mess. For quite a while, what AMD was doing was kind of leapfrogging. So, well, I guess that's not entirely true. For a while, they would have, they call it 8,000, and that was their mobile processors. But I guess that's not true, because they had some overlap in there. So yeah, they never, with their mobile, they've kind of always floundered with what they were going to call it, and it depended on the generation.
Yeah. Well, and I get why they wanted to do that, because they were pushing out mobile chips that were still using the old die generation.
Right.
Which there are reasons you might want to do that for, power consumption or what have you. It might make sense, but it's kind of a downer for marketing to say, here's our new 5,000 series chips. Yes, we know we just announced the 6,000 for the desktop, but you should really buy these on your laptop. Yeah.
Well, and they're coming out with the 5900X, which is a 12-core CPU. But normally the 900 ones are is it 12 core?
16, I think. Aren't
they
normally 16s? They're normally 12s.
Yeah, the 950s are the 16s.
Yeah.
So they've got it's like, wait a minute, that doesn't match the previous numbering with the. I'm okay if they would have just put like an M after it, so it's the mobile chip or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, Intel has been they've gotten the numbering down right for a long time now, right? We're at like 14 generations of good numbering system. I
believe next gen they're breaking it.
I mean, it has gotten to be kind of a mouthful. So, but hopefully they'll pick a new numbering system and stick with it for like another dozen generations, and not just make something up every time. That's really where it gets to be a problem. Like when you've got to make something up for every release, like nobody knows what generation you're in, what you're talking about.
And what's worse is when the number doesn't, bigger's not better. Because I know NVIDIA's been caught at that where, oh, this is a 960 whatever. Yeah, but it's actually the previous generation 950, and it's not, it's slower than the current gen's 950. I mean, I don't know. You have to have a scorecard to keep track of everybody so you know exactly what you're getting. I think we're having a technical difficulty.
Okay, so it's not just me.
No. I think we might have lost Jonathan a little bit there. Anybody in the audience, are we coming in, David and I coming in okay? Or is Jonathan coming okay and David and I are messed up?
Whoa. Okay.
Wow.
So which one of us is host now?
I don't know. I just know that, that's what happens when he had an opinion I didn't agree with. Let that be a lesson.
Am I back yet? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now,
good.
Yes.
That was fun. All right. So let's see. Where were we? Oh, yes. Intel and their 13th and 14th generation desktop processors have had a problem. You may have noticed. If you have one of those, you may have had crashes. And come to find out, that was a problem with voltages and overvolting parts of the Intel processors. And I believe Intel tried really hard to blame motherboard manufacturers. I'm not sure if that is or is not the case.
They did.
Well, I know they tried to. I'm not sure whether or not the blame actually fully.
Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
It will be releasing a microcode update, and it's going to fix everything.
Is he running on an Intel chip?
Permanent. Yeah,
Could
some of
be.
these Intel.
You're dropping out, Jonathan.
I'm continuing to drop out. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what's causing that. Anyway, these Intel chips have been, in some cases, permanently damaged. And out of the goodness of their hearts, to try to save their reputation, Intel is extending the warranty on all 13th and 14th generation CPUs for an extra 2 years, just to say, we goofed and we're sorry, and yes, we will make it right. So if you have one of these 13th, 14th generation chips, it is time to keep an eye on them. And if they get real flaky on you, you might want to reach out and get them RMA'd. Wait until after the microcode update. That way you don't break the new chip. But there was a bit of a problem there, and Intel is trying to make it right. This has been going on for a while, though, hasn't it? It's been kind of a thing happening in the background that, gaming on them or what have you, that it's sort of not entirely stable.
Yeah, so they did try to blame motherboards, and the argument came down to Intel said, why did you give us this voltage? And the motherboard manufacturer said, that's our job. You ask for it. We have to supply what you ask for. Mm-hmm. And so there became a head-to-head there. And I think they kind of finally sorted that out. There was also an issue with oxide that was growing in some of the chips, and they solved that, but they didn't recall the chips. So there were some of them, I think even into early 24, that still had the problem. And then now it's just anecdotal at this point. There was a person that had a problem with 2 chips, and they were saying, oh, those are not official chips. But he had all of photographic evidence that, like, yeah, they were official Intel. They weren't counterfeit. One was from Micro Center. I think one was from Amazon. Maybe it was 2 reputable companies that he purchased them from. And
At least one reputable company and Amazon.
Yeah, but I want to say I thought it was a reputable company through Amazon. It wasn't like Bob's PC place. And then there's been some talk about, are they going to support the tray systems? Because if you buy an Intel boxed one, you get an actual box with, probably comes with a cooler in some cases. They will support the warranty on that. Mm-hmm. They've been a little flaky on the tray. Now what happens there is somebody will buy a large tray of processors, and because they're buying a bulk tray, they get it at a cheaper price and they can sell them cheaper. So you probably just get the CPU in a little package. You're not getting all the other stuff and the stickers and whatnot with it. And trays are usually for OEMs or somebody like that needs to build a lot of systems. Yep. Now, what's happening with the voltage? So what happens when you overvolt your silicon, it degrades it. So that's how you can actually accelerate wear to see how long are your chips going to last. You accelerate temperature and you accelerate voltage. Well, these modern chips are designed to run at about 95 to 100 C, and they say they throttle themselves there. So you're already pretty hot. Now you've got over voltage. You're just increasing wear. And one of the reasons they said they're going to go to 2 years is because you might be like, oh, my chip is running fine. Well, but it's already degraded a bunch, and you might have taken several years of life off of it. And within a year, it might die because you basically wore it out. You just don't realize it right now. So they've been having a lot of flack about not jumping in and saying, okay, we're just going to recall them or automatically exchange them, no questions asked. There's certain, some of the RMA stuff, they've had some pushback. So Intel's having a heck of a time. And they had the 15,000 people laid off, or they are laying off.
Yeah, that's rough to all happen at the same time.
Yeah.
There's your doom and gloom, folks.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of internet videos on it. You can look at Linus Tech Tips. Gamers Nexus has some good ones. Level 1 Techs, they've got some good stuff out there. Yeah. And there's a talk too. A lot of people are saying, okay, we're going to check the 9000 series versus the next generation of Intel chips, but can we recommend them? There's not getting a warm fuzzy. Yeah. And a lot of them said, okay, they should have owned up to it and said, you know what, we dropped the ball, our bad. You got any problems, no questions asked, RMA, or we do a recall, we'll take care of it, we'll fix it, versus kind of dragging their feet a little.
Yeah, in my opinion, though, coming out and giving these 2 generations the 2 years of free extra warranty, that honestly, that goes a long ways towards making it right. This sounds to me like they're finally coming out and owning up and saying, yes, there were some problems. So,
yeah, and as long as the RMA process is going to be nice and easy and not fighting it.
That's true. There could be some malicious compliance going on there from Intel, I suppose.
Yeah, like I said, there was some anecdotal stuff where they were pushing back on a return, but I haven't heard of any large scale. It was kind of a little more anecdotal. So I would think at that point Intel would, and I don't know if it's true or not. I've heard they have a third party doing the RMAs. They're not actually doing them themselves. They just kind of work with a third party. But I would think either way, they would say, look, just take them back, exchange them. Don't don't fight it. Don't,
Yeah.
it
takes some time though for that sort of order to make its way down. Like for the engineers, the high level engineers to realize there's a problem with these chips. And then, that order starts filtering. So at first it's got to go up to your CEOs who are then going to make a decision. How do we handle this? And then that sort of filters down and finally makes it to the people on the ground running the OEM process. And that in a big corporation, that could take some time. So I'm not surprised.
Well, it's probably, and it takes time to figure that stuff out, because even having a dead chip, you can say, well, we know, I think they call it the ring buffer or ring connection. It's like an interconnect between the cores. And you can say, oh yeah, it's dead. We see that. Well, why? What's causing this? Where is this coming from? And it could be the overvoltage is only in certain instances where it's really trying to stress something, trying to peak a core. And so you've got to have those right conditions to catch that. And some of that stuff, people think, well, you just hook it up to all the scopes and meters and testers. It'd be easy. A lot of times there's a lot of interactions, and when you get something coming back with an RMA, you got to first figure out, did somebody do something they shouldn't have? Or did this, did the motherboard do something that the CPU said, I need 1.1 volts, and the motherboard gave it 1.7, or there's a lot of back and forth and just rooting through the problem to figure out what actually goes on. Because the integration in the chips is so complex.
Yeah. It's a very difficult problem to solve these days.
Yeah. Sorry, my background was coming out there.
Oh, no, it's great. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Definitely good stuff.
So I don't know if it's related to this or something else, but out of curiosity, I just checked, and their stock price lost almost a third of its value yesterday.
Ouch.
Well, the entire tech sector took a major header. A lot
yesterday?
Of companies. The last couple days. Yeah,
okay.
All the tech companies are just taking a major hit. So they're not alone. AMD, Nvidia, they're all.
I didn't look anybody else up. I was just, since we were talking about Intel, I looked them up.
Micron's took a hit. The whole market was taking a header.
Is that just because all the earning calls happened and people started seeing things not going the direction they wanted it to, or was there some big piece of news that we missed?
Well, it was more related, people say, to the jobs report, and the U.S. didn't get as many jobs as they thought, and everything seemed weaker, and they didn't lower interest rates, so they're thinking, oh, are we heading to a recession? So everybody had nervous sell-offs, and so there wasn't one. Well, I mean, that was the one big news, but there was nothing directly in tech saying, panic.
The normal stock market and economic stuff, not tech.
Yes.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. And Intel's layoff didn't help, but a lot of that was related to their foundry businesses not doing so hot. Mm-hmm. So they actually hired somebody from Micron, Naga, and he's going to run their foundry business. And he's a really sharp guy. I have a lot of respect for him. So we'll see if he can turn the foundry stuff around.
Interesting.
All right.
Very cool.
So this is ULS Stock Tips. You heard it here first.
This is not economic advice. Talk to your advisor before you buy any stocks. We are not lawyers.
Or CPAs or investors. Or
Indeed.
If you listen to a random guy on the internet for your stock advice, you're going to have a bad time of it.
Oh, the funniest thing. So I interviewed Eben Upton on Floss Weekly back months ago now about Raspberry Pi. And we asked him about, because at that time it was sort of rumored and was beginning to be more solid that an IPO was coming. So we talked a little bit about that. And then we talked about a bunch of other tech stuff. Posted it on YouTube. When the IPO happened, I had people coming to that YouTube video and commenting, should I buy the Raspberry Pi IPO? I don't know. You do you, man. I'm not going to give you that kind of advice.
Yeah.
Looking for tips. It was great.
Yeah. And just kind of a little editorial. Yeah. A little editorial. I think Intel's problems were when they had too many bean counters running it and they didn't have a engineer forcing the technology more. And there was too much marketing and accounting going on.
Yes.
But that's my opinion. And, what's it worth? Absolutely nothing.
it's worth what you just paid to get it.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, they are. I was going to say that, but they are actually paying because they're in the club.
Oh yeah, that's true. Well, not so, if we may have some live viewers that are getting it directly. And if you are, let's see up there, join the club now.
That thing. Scan it. Join the club.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move to some command line tips. This is the real good stuff. This is what people are really here for. Talking about all of these juicy command line tips. We've got some fun ones today. I know Jeff has a really fun gaming sort of tip, and I have an oddball tip that would actually be a lot of fun. I don't know if I'm ever going to use it, but it'd be a lot of fun to do. We're going to let David go first, though, and he's going to talk about local send.
Yes, which is not a command line tip at all, but it is a tip. And so if you have friends that use Apple, first, I'm sorry for you. No, I'm joking. But you are probably familiar with, whatever they call it, AirDrop. Yes. And, easy way to transfer files between iOS devices and Mac and iOS. You've got a few other technologies out there, Windows and Samsung, I think it is. They have one that you can use for their devices, and it's Nearby Share or Near Share or something. But what about something that breaks down the barriers, brings us all together, and lets us share our memes directly? We have the solution for you. It's called Local Send. So I've got a link to an article about it in the show notes. And it's an open source AirDrop alternative for everyone. So you can install it on all your devices, Android and iOS, all your operating systems, Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's written primarily in the Dart programming language, which is the main programming language. Well, not the main. It's the programming language behind Flutter, which we've mentioned before. And they talk in the article about some of the tests and stuff. He's got lots of screenshots and everything. I have not installed it yet, but I'm actually planning on doing it because I have needs quite often for sharing stuff. And honestly, most often what I do right now is use something like Google Drive or OneDrive to sync it out of wherever I'm at up to a cloud service and then back down, because that's faster than trying to share between, 3 or 4 different operating systems at the same time. So this is a tool that I came across, and I have definite use cases for it. But the only thing they mentioned is, he said smaller transfers are better than large transfers, because he did try a 90 gig transfer, and after fluctuating speeds, it ended up just failing. But if you're transferring 90 gig, you probably need something a little more robust than any sort of quick share operation. And now I haven't tested it, but I'm not even sure if AirDrop could handle something that large. It is exactly. But hey, it's a quick tip. Not command line specifically, but you can run it from anything, and it is in the FlatHub store, to have a quick callback to a previous article. So,
yeah,
lots of options. No, they don't mention that. So,
no Snap.
Yeah, it's in Snap. They've got a Snap.
Oh, it is in Snap. Okay,
snapcraft.io/localsend.
Awesome.
There you go.
So yeah, all your repository sources.
Yep, very cool. I'm looking to see if you can run it from the command line. It seems like there should be a way to, but I don't see it. So maybe it really is a GUI only program.
Well, you can always kick them off from the command line.
There you go. You can if you would like to. Yes. All right, Jeff, what do you have for us?
Well, I have RetroArch. Now, we're not talking about the distribution Arch. We're talking games. And I know a lot of you like to play games, and this is a classic video game emulator, so you can play those old fond memories. Now, you might be thinking, Steam does that. I don't have a problem playing old games. Well, RetroArch is a little different. It's a multi-emulator application. For example, you can play PS1, PS2, PSP, Nintendo Switch, and Commodore games among many others. I mean, there's several other consoles that are emulated as well. So this is all your childhood fantasies for those of you that are old enough to have those older machines as childhood playthings. Now, you might be thinking there's a lot of emulators out there that do this. Isn't, what's the big deal? Well, the difference is RetroArch has an online updater functionality, which allows you to download free games directly and quickly within the app. Another benefit is where, it's not only available for Linux, but it's available for Mac OS on AMD 64 and ARM platforms. And yeah, there's some other OS called Windows, I think. I don't know, whatever it is. I guess it works on there too, but I don't know anything about that one. The program has support for advanced features like shaders, netplay, rewinding, next frame response times, run ahead, machine translation, blind accessibility features, and many others across multiple platforms. So if you're a fan of old games, take a look at the article in the show notes. It has instructions on how to install it on Ubuntu and other distributions. You can install it via, and I didn't prep this, Snap, Flatpak, or an Ubuntu PPA. So Snap or Flatpak, it's right there for you. It gives you instructions on how to play the games as well and how to uninstall it if you decide that gaming is taking up too much of your time. So not that we would ever get too sidetracked with games, but give it a look.
Yeah, RetroArch is cool. One of the really fun things about it is that it runs everywhere. And so if you've got a smart TV, you can probably install RetroArch on it. If you're running it used to be Xbox Media Center, XBMC. It's now whatever it's called now. My brain will not come up with the name of it, but you can install all of the RetroArch plugins inside of that. And so you can have your video game experience right there on your TV interface. One of the real fun things about RetroArch is a lot of the commercial emulators, like the 26-in-1 emulators, it's actually running RetroArch underneath. There's been a few times that they've tried to go after people. It's like, that's supposed to be GPL'd.
And the thing is that old hardware was so slow compared to modern day that it's not hard to emulate and things like that. There's probably a lot of them that they've had to slow down from even like a TV CPU, it just. Yep.
Kodi is what I was trying to come up with, by the way. The project formerly known as XBMC. Now Kodi. I should know that. I've got it on my TV. Anyway, all right, my command line tip. This is a fun one. This is an oddball tip. It is TCC. That is the Trivial C compiler. It is literally exactly what it says on the tin. It is a micro compiler for C code. You generally don't need make files. You just run. Now, there is a trick that you can do with TCC, and that is if you have it installed, you can do a shebang to the TCC location and then append -run to the end of that and use C scripting as your interpreter there and be able to just run a .c and it will compile it and run it for you. C scripting on your Linux machines. That's fun. That's terrible and horrible and a bad idea, but a lot of fun.
David's cringing in the background for those that can't see it.
Because you can. We must because we can.
So is that the main purpose of TCC? So you can do that?
No, it's a full blown compiler. You can do all kinds of stuff with it, but it's one of the tricks that it lets you do.
And the reason you can do that is because it's self-contained. So it doesn't have any external linkers or anything. It's completely self-contained. I was reading through the documentation because when I saw the link in the show notes, and I was kind of like, but why? They did actually say it allows you to use C in Python or Perl.
TCC is installable in your Debian derivatives. It is not, unfortunately, in Fedora. I was a little sad by that, but I could put it on the Pop! OS laptop. I think I'll have to do that and do some C scripting.
Now, one of the interesting things about it, though, again, but why? But they did mention that it is extremely fast, and it is so fast that a C script will be almost as fast or almost indistinguishable from compiling it and running it, the application.
Yep. Yeah, which in some cases is going to be faster than something like a bash script. So there you go.
Yeah, faster than a bash script is not setting a high benchmark in my experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact that you're compiling the program and then running it is faster than the bash script can run it. That's maybe saying something.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that is our tips. It has been fun. I'm going to let each of the guys get in the last word, plug whatever they want to. David is up first.
Well, I don't really have anything specific to plug. Yes, I'm pointing in the correct direction. I will plug, if you're watching this live and you're not already a member of the club, why aren't you a member of the club? Right there. Scan that QR code thing that way. Dang it. Mirrored screen and all that. And join us. We have lots of fun. And there's no reason not to. So come on.
Absolutely. All right, Jeff.
Well, hopefully this time next week I'll have a nice ending note. I'm going to go to Bonneville and do a little racing. We'll see how that turns out. But for this week, I don't really have anything, so Poetry Corner. 10,000 things. How long do any persist? Netscape 2 has gone. Have a great week, everybody.
Oh, that's great. All right. Thank you guys for being here. You can find my work on Hackaday. Oh, I've got my terminal pulled up back there. It's scrolling log messages. Underneath that is Hackaday. Go find my stuff on Hackaday. The security column goes live Friday mornings. We've got Floss Weekly over there as well. Been having a lot of fun with Floss Weekly. They're getting me with Java. And Floss Weekly. So last week was JReleaser. Up next week is another Java application. It's fine. I'll put up with it. It's a fine language. It's fine. But we appreciate everybody being here. Appreciate you supporting Club TWiT. Make sure to join the club if you're not. And hey, we will be back next week with the Untitled Linux Show, and we'll see you then.